You've probably been sunburned, maybe badly. Maybe you remember the specific sting of it, the heat that doesn't go away when you move into the shade, the skin that tightens like something is being drawn shut underneath it. And you reach for the aloe vera, or you lie very still on top of the bed sheets because even the weight of a sheet is too much, and you wait for it to pass. But here's what nobody told you while you were doing all of that. Something was happening at a scale so small it makes atoms look enormous. The light that burned you left a star 8 minutes ago. It traveled 93 million miles through the near-perfect vacuum of space, arriving at your skin at the speed of light. And when it arrived, it didn't just heat your skin. It rearranged it. At the molecular level, at the quantum level, something ancient and nuclear reached across the void of space and rewrote the chemistry of your body, not in a vague metaphorical sense, literally, chemically. The bonds between atoms in your cells were broken and reformed in ways they were never supposed to be. And what I want to do today, what I find genuinely, almost painfully exciting about this topic, is to follow that event all the way down, to go from the nuclear furnace at the center of the sun, across 93 million miles of empty space, through the layers of your skin, into the nucleus of a single cell, and ask what actually happened there. What did the physics do? And what does it tell us? Not just about sunburn, not just about skin, but about what you are, what you're made of, how old those ingredients are, and what it means to be a living arrangement of ancient matter standing in the light of a nearby star. I want to start by telling you something that I think changes the whole shape of this conversation, because I've noticed that most people, when they think about sunburn, are thinking about a surface story. Heat comes in, skin turns red, it hurts, it peels, you should have worn sunscreen. That version of the story is true, the way a grocery list is true. It tells you what's there, but absolutely nothing about why any of it matters, what any of it actually means, or what is happening at the scale where the interesting physics lives. And the interesting physics, I promise you, is worth the journey down to it. Because at the quantum level, at the atomic level, this is not a mundane story about too much time on the beach. This is a story about the relationship between light and life, about a conversation that has been ongoing for 4 billion years, about the extraordinary sophistication of a biological system that has been dealing with ultraviolet radiation since before animals had skin, since before animals existed at all. And it is, if you stay with me, also a story about the fact that the atoms on the long after any given sunburn is healed and been forgotten. So let me begin with the photon. Let me begin at the beginning, which is the center of the sun, because that is where this story actually starts. Not on the beach, not at the surface of your skin, in the core of a star. The sun's core is not a place you can easily visualize, because nothing in your ordinary experience gives you the right intuitions for it. The temperature at the center of the sun is approximately 15 million degrees Celsius. The pressure is about 250 billion atmospheres, meaning that the weight of the entire sun above it is pressing down on every point in the core simultaneously. At that temperature and pressure, matter does not behave the way matter behaves anywhere you have ever been. Electrons have been stripped from their atoms. What you have is a plasma, a soup of bare atomic nuclei and free electrons, moving at velocities that would seem impossible in any everyday context. And in that plasma, something is happening continuously. Nuclear fusion. Protons, the nuclei of hydrogen atoms, are being squeezed together by the immense gravitational pressure until they fuse into helium nuclei, releasing energy in the process. This is not a chemical reaction. It is a nuclear reaction. The strong nuclear force is doing something, that electromagnetic repulsion. The force that usually keeps positively charged protons away from each other has been overcome by gravity and heat. And in that fusion event, energy is released. Part of that energy takes the form of photons, packets of electromagnetic radiation, light in the most general sense of the word. Now, the photon that is born in the solar core, it is not going to travel directly to your skin. I need to tell you something about the interior of the sun. That is, in my experience, one of the most genuinely surprising facts in all of astrophysics. The solar interior is extraordinarily dense. So dense that a photon of light trying to travel outward from the core toward the surface cannot go in a straight line. It is constantly being absorbed by a nearby particle and re-emitted gets absorbed, and then re-emitted, pointing in a direction that has nothing to do with where it was just going. Then it takes another step, gets absorbed, and re-emitted in another random direction. Then another, and another. This is called a random walk. And the mathematics of random walks is counterintuitive, because when you move randomly in all directions, your progress in any one direction is extraordinarily slow. If you took one step forward, and then one step in a random direction, and then another step in a random direction, over and over again, you would eventually drift away from your starting point. But the rate at which you drift is much, much slower than if you were walking purposefully. For a photon in the solar interior, this random walk takes a very long time. Estimates range from about 10,000 years on the low end to about 100,000 years on the high end. That is how long it takes, on average, for the energy born in a fusion reaction in the solar core to fight its way out to the solar surface. The actual distance from the core to the surface is only about 400,000 miles. Light traveling in a straight line would cross that distance in about 2 seconds. But because the path is not straight, because every step is a random direction, the journey takes 100,000 years. A photon that was born in the solar core around the time that Homo sapiens first appeared in Africa may be reaching the solar surface right now, today, this afternoon. That energy has been bouncing around inside the sun for the entire span of human prehistory. And then, at the surface, something changes. The density drops. The photon is released. It enters free space. And it travels, now in a straight line, at the speed of light, crossing the distance from the sun to the earth in 8 minutes and 20 seconds. 8 minutes after 100,000 years inside the sun. 8 minutes to cross 93 million miles of empty space. And then it arrives at the top of our atmosphere, where it begins to interact with air molecules, where it gets scattered and absorbed in various ways, depending on its energy, its wavelength, its angle of approach. And some of it, the part we care about for this conversation, arrives at the surface of your skin. Now I want you to stay with that picture for a moment before we go smaller, because there is something in it that I think deserves to be felt before it's analyzed. You are standing in sunlight. Maybe you're on a beach. Maybe you're in your backyard. Maybe you're just walking from your car to a building on a summer afternoon. You feel the warmth. You might feel the light on your face. And what is physically happening in that moment is that you are being touched by energy that spent 100,000 years bouncing around inside a star and then crossed 93 million miles of empty space in 8 minutes and has now arrived at you specifically, at the precise angle, at the precise moment to interact with the precise molecules in the precise cells of your skin. The universe is vast. The scales involved are almost incomprehensibly large. And yet the interaction, when it finally happens, is happening at the scale of molecules, at the scale of individual atoms, at the scale of quantum events. The biggest and the smallest are meeting right there on the surface of your arm on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. I find that extraordinary. I have found it extraordinary for my entire adult life, and familiarity has not dimmed it. I hope it does something to you too. Now let's go smaller. Your skin is not a simple structure. Most people think of skin as a kind of outer wrapper, the thing that keeps the inside in and the outside out. But skin is an organ, a living, dynamic, extraordinarily complex organ with multiple layers, each with specific functions, and each populated by cells doing very specific jobs. The outermost layer, the part that sunlight hits first, is the epidermis. And within the epidermis, there are several distinct cell types, but the ones we care most about today are the keratinocytes, which make up most of the epidermis, and the melanocytes, which are scattered among them and which produce the pigment melanin. There are also, in the deeper layers of the epidermis and just below, the structures I really want you to understand today, because they are where the most important physics happens. I'm talking about the nuclei of those cells, and inside those nuclei, DNA. Now here is something I want to give you as a picture before I give you the science, because the science lands differently when you have the picture first. Imagine the most precisely maintained library you can imagine. Not a modern library, an ancient one. The kind of library that people have been copying and preserving and repairing for thousands of years, where every scroll is handled with specific tools by trained specialists, where there are whole teams of people whose only job is to check the copies against the originals for errors and to repair any damage before it spreads. And imagine that this library has been maintained without interruption for 4 billion years. Not just maintained, continuously copied, because the library reproduces itself. handing copies to daughter institutions all over the world, and each copy is checked for accuracy, and each error is corrected, and the error rate is kept so low that it is almost unimaginably small. That library is your DNA, the most carefully preserved document in the history of the planet. 4 billion years of biological information, encoded in a molecule so precise that the error rate during copying is approximately one mistake in every 10 billion base pairs copied. That is not an accident. That is the result of 4 billion years of selection pressure. Every organism that made copies less accurately eventually lost the competition to organisms that made copies more accurately, and the accuracy improved and improved and improved until it reached that almost miraculous level that we see today. And that library, that 4 billion year old, extraordinarily precise, constantly copied and repaired library, is what a UV photon is about to interact with. Let me tell you what ultraviolet light actually is, because understanding this changes everything about how you understand sunburn. Light, all light, is electromagnetic radiation. It is an oscillating electric and magnetic field propagating through space, and it comes in different varieties, distinguished by wavelength and frequency. Visible light is the portion of the electromagnetic spectrum that your eyes are sensitive to. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet, and everything in between. Just below the visible range at shorter wavelengths and higher frequencies is ultraviolet light. UVA, UVB, UVC, different bands of ultraviolet with different energies and different effects. Here is the critical physics point, and I want to make sure it lands clearly. The energy of a photon is determined by its frequency. Higher frequency means shorter wavelength, and this is the key. Higher energy per photon. A UV photon, because it has a higher frequency than a visible light photon, carries more energy. Not more light, more energy per quantum. Each individual UV photon packs more punch than each individual visible light photon. And that difference in energy is precisely what determines whether a photon can break a chemical bond in your DNA. This was worked out by Albert Einstein. And I always enjoy mentioning this because most people think Einstein's most important contribution was relativity, when in fact, the work for which he won the Nobel Prize was the photoelectric effect, which is exactly the physics we're discussing right now. Einstein showed that when light interacts with matter, it does so as discrete packets, photons, and that the ability of light to eject electrons from a material, or by extension to break chemical bonds, depends entirely on the frequency of the light, not on its intensity. You can shine as much low-frequency light as you want on a surface, and if the frequency is too low, nothing will happen. No electrons will be ejected. No bonds will be broken. But a single photon of sufficiently high frequency will do the job. One photon. The frequency is what matters. The energy per quantum is what matters. This is why a heat lamp doesn't give you skin cancer. Infrared photons, the ones responsible for the warmth you feel from a heat lamp or a fireplace, have lower frequencies than visible light. They can excite molecular vibrations which we experience as heat, but they cannot break the specific bonds in DNA that ultraviolet photons can break. The mechanism of sunburn damage is not thermal. It is not heat causing the problem, even though heat is what you feel. The damage is quantum mechanical. It is the result of individual photons, each carrying enough energy to alter a specific molecule, doing exactly that, one interaction at a time. So a UV photon arrives at your skin. It travels through the outermost layers of dead skin cells, and it enters the living cells of the epidermis. And now it is looking, in a probabilistic sense and a quantum mechanical sense, for something to be absorbed by. It is interacting with the electromagnetic fields of the molecules it passes through. And certain molecules have an affinity for certain wavelengths of UV light. They absorb it efficiently. And one of the molecules that absorbs UVB radiation, the kind most responsible for sunburn, particularly efficiently, is DNA. Specifically, the aromatic rings in the bases of DNA, the letters of the genetic code, have electronic structures that interact strongly with UVB photons. The DNA is, unfortunately, an excellent absorber of exactly the kind of light that is most dangerous to it. And here's what happens when a UV photon is absorbed by a specific location in the DNA. There are 4 bases in DNA: adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine. Think of them as the 4 letters of the genetic alphabet. Every gene, every protein coding sequence, every regulatory element in your genome is written in combinations of these 4 letters. Now, thymine, one of the 4 letters, has a particular vulnerability. When two thymine bases happen to be sitting adjacent to each other on the same strand of the DNA double helix, and when a UV photon is absorbed in that region, the energy from the photon can cause those two adjacent thymines to form a chemical bond between them, a bond that was never supposed to exist. This is called a thymine dimer. The two rungs of the DNA ladder, which were supposed to be independent, which were supposed to pair with their partners on the opposite strands separately and cleanly, have been fused together by the photon's energy. The DNA is now physically distorted. The double helix has developed a kink, a structural deformity at the site of the dimer. Now your body faces a problem, because the DNA replication machinery, the molecular machine that copies DNA when cells divide, cannot read through a thymine dimer. The machinery gets stuck. It's like trying to read a sentence in which two letters have been glued together. The machine can't parse it, and if a cell tries to divide while it has a thymine dimer in its DNA, the machinery will either stall, or it will make an error, inserting the wrong letter in the copy, or in extreme cases, it will trigger a cascade that leads to cell death. Any of these outcomes is better than copying the damage faithfully forward, which is why the machinery is designed to stall rather than to proceed inaccurately. But your body has something ready for exactly this situation, something that has been refined by evolution for billions of years. A repair system. Several repair systems, in fact. And I want to tell you about the primary one because it is one of the most elegant pieces of molecular machinery I know of. It is called nucleotide excision repair, and it works like this. There are proteins in your cells. We call them damage recognition proteins, whose job is to patrol the DNA continuously, looking for distortions in the double helix. Thymine dimers cause a physical kink in the helix. The structure is wrong. And when a damage recognition protein encounters that kink, it binds to it. It recognizes that something is wrong here. And its binding triggers the recruitment of a whole cascade of other proteins, a repair complex. That complex does something remarkable. It cuts the DNA strand on both sides of the damage, some distance away from the kink, enough to cut out not just a dimer but a surrounding section of about 20 to 30 base pairs. It removes the damaged section. It excises it entirely, like a molecular editor cutting out a corrupted paragraph from a document. And then it uses the other strand, the complementary strand, which is undamaged and intact, as a template to synthesize a new section of DNA that correctly fills the gap. The polymerase enzyme reads the complementary strand and writes the new section letter by letter, following the base pairing rules that are the foundation of how all DNA replication works. And then a final protein, called a ligase, seals the last connection, joins the new section to the existing strand on either side, and the repair is complete. The DNA is restored to its original sequence. No trace of the damage remains. This process happens thousands of times per day in your skin cells. Thousands of thymine dimers are being found, excised, and replaced continuously in every moment that your skin is exposed to sunlight. You are being molecularly repaired in real time, right now, without any conscious awareness that it is happening. The machinery is ancient and automatic and extraordinarily capable. And in the vast majority of cases, in essentially all cases, under normal exposure conditions, it works perfectly. The damage is repaired before it can cause any downstream problem. Your genome is restored. The library's text is preserved. Most of the time, but not always. And I want to be honest with you about what happens when it doesn't work. Not to frighten you, fear is almost always less useful than understanding. But because the story of what happens when the repair fails is also part of the full picture of what sunburn is and what it can become. Occasionally, the repair machinery misses a thymine dimer. Perhaps the damage occurred in a part of the chromatin that was tightly packed and less accessible at the time. Perhaps the volume of damage was large enough from intense exposure that the repair machinery became locally saturated. Perhaps the dimer was in a location that made it harder to recognize. For whatever reason, the dimer is not repaired, and then the cell divides. The replication machinery encounters the dimer, and at that point, one of several things happens. In many cases, what is called translation synthesis occurs. A specialized error-prone polymerase takes over and reads through the dimer. But because the dimer is ambiguous, it frequently inserts the wrong base. The result is a point mutation, a change in a single letter of the genetic code at a specific location in the genome. Most point mutations are harmless. The genetic code has redundancy built into it, Many amino acids are coded for by multiple different three-letter sequences, so a change in one letter sometimes doesn't change the protein that is ultimately produced. Or the mutation occurs in a non-coding region of the genome, or the mutated protein, while different, still functions adequately. The consequences of most mutations are zero or negligible. The genome, while altered, still works. But occasionally, rarely, but not never, a mutation occurs in a location that matters critically. In a gene that controls cell division, in a tumor suppressor gene whose normal function is to put the brakes on cell division and to trigger apoptosis, program cell death. When something is wrong, or in a proto-oncogene whose normal function is to promote cell division under specific controlled circumstances, but which, when mutated, becomes an oncogene, a gene that signals for cell division continuously, regardless of context. When mutations like these accumulate, it typically takes multiple mutations in multiple relevant genes over a period of years or decades. The normal regulation of cell division can break down, and a cell that is no longer subject to the normal controls can begin to divide without limit. That is cancer. At the most fundamental level, that is what skin cancer is. A consequence of rather than let it sit in the conversation like something unnamed, and therefore more frightening than it needs to be. The thing about cancer and about UV-induced skin cancer specifically is that it is one of the best understood, most mechanistically characterized forms of cancer that exists. We know the source of the damage. We know the type of mutation it causes. We know which genes are most often affected. We know, in considerable detail, the progression from initial DNA damage to malignancy. And that understanding is genuinely useful, not just scientifically, but practically. It gives us real, evidence-based tools for prevention, early detection, and treatment. Understanding is not frightening. Understanding is what makes the frightening thing manageable. And I also want to remind you, because I think this is the part of the story that gets most lost in the fear around skin cancer, that the defense systems I've been describing are extraordinarily effective. The progression from UV exposure to skin cancer requires multiple failures across multiple defense systems, typically over years or decades of chronic repeated exposure. The repair machinery has to miss the damage. The apoptosis systems have to fail to eliminate the damaged cell. The immune surveillance, your body's ongoing monitoring for abnormal cell behavior, has to fail to catch the mutated cell before it replicates. These are not trivial failures. They are each rare. And for all of them to fail simultaneously in the same cell, repeatedly, is rarer still. Most UV-damaged cells are repaired. Most that aren't repaired undergo apoptosis. Most that don't undergo apoptosis are caught by immune surveillance. Cancer is the end result of an extraordinarily long chain of failures, systems that were specifically designed to prevent exactly that outcome. That is not a reason for complacency. It is a reason for accurate understanding of actual risk, rather than generalized anxiety about a process that the body is handling most of the time with remarkable success. Now I want to talk about what you experience on the surface. Because the redness, the heat, the tenderness, the peeling, these things are happening for specific reasons, and those reasons are interesting. And understanding them changes how you relate to the experience of sunburn. The redness, what physicians call erythema, is almost universally interpreted as evidence of damage, as a sign that something has gone wrong. And I understand why. Because redness is associated with injury. We bleed and the blood shows red. We burn and the skin turns red. Red seems to be the body's color for things going badly. But in the specific case of sunburn, the redness is not primarily the damage. It is the response to the damage. It is the immune system mobilizing, and a mobilizing immune system is a functioning immune system. The redness is the cavalry arriving, not the town burning. Here is what is happening specifically. When skin cells detect UV damage, when enough thymine dimers accumulate, when repair machinery is running at capacity, when the stress signals from damaged cells reach a threshold, those cells release chemical signals, molecules called prostaglandins, cytokines, interleukins. These are signaling molecules, the body's internal communication system, and their message is essentially, we need help here. Send resources, and the body responds by dilating the blood vessels in the affected area. more blood flows in. More blood means more warmth. That's why sunburned skin feels hot. More blood means more redness because blood is red, and more of it near the surface means more red visible through the skin. More blood also means more immune cells arriving at the site because immune cells travel in the bloodstream, and where the blood goes, they go too. The inflammation, the redness, the warmth, the swelling is the body opening its highways, rushing its repair and defense resources to the location where they are needed. The pain is also doing something specific. The inflammatory signals that cause the redness also affect the pain receptors in the skin, the nociceptors, making them more sensitive. Technically, this is called peripheral sensitization. The threshold for what triggers pain in the affected area is lowered. This is why sunburned skin hurts when things touch it that would not normally cause pain. The weight of a bedsheet, warm water in the shower, the light friction of a shirt. The pain system is not malfunctioning. It is doing exactly what pain systems do, communicating information about the state of the tissue and discouraging behaviors that could cause additional damage. The sunburned skin is being repaired. It is in a fragile, active repair state. The pain is a guard at the door. Do not let anything else damage this tissue while we are working on it. And then there is the peeling. The peeling is perhaps the most viscerally unsettling part of sunburn for most people because it looks like you are falling apart. The skin is coming off in sheets or in smaller patches or in that specific kind of fine powdery flaking that happens with milder burns. It can look and feel like the body is breaking down. And the truth is nearly the opposite. The peeling is one of the most elegant protective mechanisms in the entire sunburn story. Here is what is happening. Cells that have detected a high level of DNA damage, cells that have thymine dimers that have not been repaired, or that have been imperfectly repaired, or that have accumulated enough cumulative damage to trigger a concern. Those cells receive signals that initiate apoptosis, programmed cell death. This sounds dire, but it is precisely the opposite of a catastrophe. Apoptosis is the cell's way of saying, I may be compromised, I have damage that puts me at risk of replicating in a way that could be harmful to the broader organism, and therefore I am going to exit the story cleanly and deliberately, in a controlled way that does not cause inflammation or harm to neighboring cells, so that the overall tissue remains healthy. The cell essentially disassembles itself in an orderly fashion. It packages its contents for recycling, it signals neighboring cells to engulf and process its remains, and then it is gone, replaced by healthy cells from the layers below. The skin that peels off a sunburn is composed primarily of cells that chose apoptosis. They are cells that made the ultimate sacrifice, and I mean this literally, not metaphorically, for the integrity of the tissue as a whole. They detected a potential problem in themselves, and they removed themselves from the picture before that problem could propagate. The peeling is the evidence of their exit, and the fresh skin underneath, the skin that feels tender and slightly raw, because it is not yet toughened by the layers that were above it. That skin is healthy skin, undamaged cells, the beneficiaries of the sacrifice made by the cells that peeled away. I want to say something about the tan, because the tan is something that almost everyone misunderstands. And the misunderstanding is worth correcting, not just as a matter of biology, but as a matter of how we think about signals and their meanings. A tan is culturally coded as health, as vitality, as evidence of outdoor activity, of warmth, of well-being. There is an entire aesthetic built around tanned skin as desirable, as a marker of prosperity and health. And I am not here to moralize about aesthetics, but I am here to tell you what a tan actually is biologically, because I think you deserve to know. A tan is your skin building a UV shield after the UV has already been detected as a threat. Melanocytes, the melanin-producing cells in the epidermis, are stimulated to produce melanin by signaling signals from cells that have detected UV damage. The melanin is then distributed to neighboring keratinocytes, where it sits like a little umbrella over the nucleus of each cell, absorbing UV photons before they can penetrate to the DNA. This is a genuine protective mechanism. It works. Darker skin, skin with more melanin, does provide meaningful protection against UV damage. That is real and important. But here's what the tan's existence tells you about timing. By the time you have a tan, your body has already detected enough UV damage to trigger a defensive response. The tan is not prophylactic in the way that sunscreen is prophylactic. You can apply sunscreen before any UV exposure occurs. The tan requires UV exposure, including some level of UV damage, to be triggered. The tan is the wall built after the alarm went off. It is protection, yes, but it is protection that was preceded by the threat it is protecting against. And the beauty of the tan, and I don't want to deny that it is aesthetically meaningful to many people, the beauty of the tan at the biological level is the beauty of a wound response, of a defense constructed in reaction to an attack. That is a different kind of beauty and perhaps a more interesting one, if you let yourself see it that way. Now, I want to take a step back from the immediate mechanisms of sunburn and talk about something larger, about the evolutionary context of all of this. Because I think that context is where the most profound insight in this whole conversation lives. Life did not evolve in spite of UV radiation. Life evolved in the presence of UV radiation on a planet bathed in sunlight, beside a star that has been radiating UV light for 4.5 billion years. And this is important because it means the relationship between life and UV is not new, it is foundational. It is one of the original conditions under which life developed. The earliest living things on Earth, the first self-replicating molecules, the first protocells, the first genuine single-celled organisms, all of them were exposed to UV radiation. And the UV flux at the Earth's surface in those early days was actually significantly higher than it is now because the ozone layer had not yet formed. There was no protective atmospheric filter. Life in its earliest forms was operating under conditions of UV exposure that would be lethal to most modern organisms. And yet, life survived. Life adapted. Life developed the tools to handle UV damage. And then it developed better tools. And then it refined those tools over billions of years until what we have today, your DNA repair machinery, your melanin, your apoptosis pathways, your immune surveillance. These represent the accumulated wisdom of billions of years of dealing with exactly this problem. The machinery in your cells that finds and fixes thymine dimers was not designed by anyone. It was selected for, over billions of generations, because organisms that had it survived better than organisms that didn't. The machinery is ancient in a way that is almost impossible to fully feel. It predates multicellular life. It predates animals. It predates the Cambrian explosion, 500 million years ago, when animal diversity exploded. It predates the development of the nervous system, the molecular machinery in your skin cells that is repairing UV damage right now is older than brains, older than eyes, older than anything you would recognize as an animal. There is something I find humbling about that. My brain, which I rather like, which I have spent considerable time relying on, is a relative newcomer. It appeared in something like its current form perhaps 2 or 3 million years ago. The molecular machinery repairing my DNA has been doing its job for 3 or 4 billion years ago. The molecular machinery repairing my DNA has been doing its job for 3 or 4 billion years ago. And it has been doing it without direction, without oversight, without any central nervous system telling it what to do. It just does it, continuously, automatically, in every one of the hundreds of millions of cells in your skin, right now. You are not fragile. You are ancient, and you carry within you tools that have been tested and refined against this specific challenge for longer than most things on this planet have existed. I mentioned the ozone layer a moment ago, and I want to come back to it because there is something in its history that I find genuinely remarkable. The ozone layer, which is the portion of the stratosphere enriched in ozone, O3, and which absorbs the most biologically dangerous UV wavelengths before they reach the surface, was not there at the beginning. The early Earth had essentially no ozone because there was essentially no oxygen in the atmosphere. Oxygen, molecular O2, the oxygen we breathe, was not present in significant quantities in the Earth's atmosphere until about 2.4 billion years ago. Before that, the atmosphere was dominated by nitrogen, carbon dioxide, methane, and other gases. There was no oxygen because there were no organisms producing oxygen in significant quantities. And then cyanobacteria happened. Cyanobacteria are single-celled photosynthetic organisms, and they evolved the ability to perform oxygenic photosynthesis, to use sunlight to split water molecules and produce oxygen as a byproduct. And they did this in the ancient oceans for hundreds of millions of years, and gradually the oxygen they produced accumulated in the atmosphere. First, it was consumed by chemical reactions with iron and other materials, but eventually it accumulated in the upper atmosphere and is exposed to UV radiation. It forms ozone. And ozone absorbs UV, and gradually, over hundreds of millions of years, the ozone layer built up. And as it built up, the UV flux at the surface decreased And that change in UV flux changed the evolutionary landscape. It made it possible for life to move from the ocean, where water provided some UV protection, onto land. The colonization of land by life, which happened starting roughly 500 million years ago, was made possible in part by the prior buildup of the ozone layer, which was itself made possible by the prior biological production of oxygen by photosynthetic microorganisms. Life engineered its own UV protection over billions of years, collectively, without any intention or plan, through the pure logic of natural selection interacting with geochemical reality. So when you put on sunscreen, which I encourage you to do, you are participating in a tradition. You are one more layer in the story of life, finding ways to manage UV exposure that has been going on since before animals existed. Your sunscreen is, in a very real evolutionary sense, the latest iteration of something cyanobacteria started doing 2.5 billion years ago, which I find a rather satisfying way of thinking about something you buy at the drugstore. Now, let me talk about the atoms, because this is the part of the conversation that, for me, makes everything else feel even more remarkable than it already is. The atoms in your skin, every single one of them, have a history that is almost inconceivably long. Let's start with hydrogen. Your body is about 60% water by mass, and every water molecule is 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom. The hydrogen in your body, the hydrogen in the water in your cells, in the cell membranes, in the DNA itself, that hydrogen was created in the Big Bang, not made by stars, not made by nuclear reactions in any stellar furnace, made in the first few minutes after the Big Bang, when the universe was hot and dense enough for the nuclear reactions that produced the first light nuclei. Hydrogen, that has been around for 13.8 billion years. You are walking around with atoms that are as old as the universe itself. The heavier elements, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, sulfur, and all the others, those have a different origin story. They were not made in the Big Bang. They were made inside stars. Stars that lived and died before our sun was born. Nuclear fusion in stellar cores produces heavier elements from lighter ones. Helium from hydrogen, carbon from helium, oxygen from carbon, and so on, up the periodic table. The heaviest elements, the ones above iron, were produced in the extreme conditions of supernova explosions, where the energy is high enough to drive fusion reactions that otherwise would not occur. And when stars die, when they explode as supernovae or shed their outer layers as planetary nebulae, they scatter their material into the interstellar medium, into the gas and dust between the stars. And that material drifts and cools and is compressed by the shock waves of other supernovae, and eventually, over timescales of millions to hundreds of millions of years, forms new clouds of gas and dust from which new stars and planetary systems form. Our solar system formed about 4.6 billion years ago from exactly such a cloud of gas and dust that was itself the remnant of one or more previous stars. Stars that had lived out their lives and scattered their material back into space. The sun formed from the densest part of that cloud. The planets, including Earth, formed from the material in the disk around the forming sun. And the atoms in that disk, in that protoplanetary material, in the early Earth, those atoms had already been through at least one stellar life cycle. They had been forged in a stellar death. They were, in a very real sense, recycled stellar material. Over the first billion years of Earth's history, those atoms arranged themselves into a planet. The heavy elements sank toward the core. The lighter elements remained in the crust and mantle. Water from the disk material, from comets, from various sources, collected on the surface. And in that water, some of those atoms, carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, sulfur, began to form complex molecules. And some of those molecules began to replicate, and the history of life began. And from that beginning, through 4 billion years of evolution, through every branch and transition in the history of life on Earth, those atoms were passed from organism to organism, from molecule to molecule, always rearranging but never being created or destroyed. They flowed through the biosphere, they cycled through the atmosphere and the ocean and the rock, and eventually, through a long sequence of events that includes the entire history of life, the evolution of mammals, the evolution of primates, the existence of your parents and grandparents and every ancestor before them, those atoms ended up arranged into you. The carbon in your DNA, the oxygen in the water in your cells, the nitrogen in the bases that encode your genetic information, the phosphorus and the sugar phosphate backbone of the double helix. These atoms were once, in some form, in a star that died before the sun was born. They were in the interstellar cloud that collapsed to form our solar system. They were in the early Earth's ocean. They were in the earliest living things. They have passed through billions of organisms across the entire history of life. And now they are in you. And now, today, a UV photon is interacting with them. When that UV photon creates a thymine dimer, when it fuses two atoms that were not supposed to be fused, it is rearranging matter that has been around since before the Earth existed. It is leaving a mark on carbon and hydrogen and nitrogen atoms that were forged in a dying star billions of years ago. And when your DNA repair machinery excises that damaged section, when the nucleotide excision repair complex cuts out the dimer and the polymerase synthesizes a new section using the complementary strand as a template, those atoms are rearranged again. The energy of the repair is drawn from other molecular processes in the cell, which draw their energy ultimately from the food you eat, which grew using sunlight, which is, of course, the very same star that caused the damage. The sun is paying for its own repairs. And if the repair doesn't work, if the cell undergoes apoptosis and the dead skin eventually peels away, then those atoms, the carbon, the hydrogen, the nitrogen, in the cells that peeled off, those atoms are released from your body and return to the environment. They become part of the dust in your home. They settle into the soil outside. They are taken up by microorganisms and plants. They are consumed by animals. They flow back into the biosphere. The atoms were in you for a while, some months, some years, and now they are somewhere else. And they will be somewhere else after that, and somewhere else after that, essentially forever, because atoms do not decompose, they rearrange. But the atoms themselves, the nuclei, the protons and neutrons at the core, those persist on timescales that dwarf everything we have been discussing. You are not the atoms. You are the arrangement. You are the specific, temporary, extraordinarily improbable pattern that those atoms have taken up right now, in this place, in this time. The atoms were here before you. They will be here after you. But the arrangement, the you-ness of you, that is happening right now, in these atoms, in this configuration. And a UV photon interacting with that arrangement does something remarkable. It forces the arrangement to respond, to repair, to protect, to adapt. And the sophistication of that response, the elegance of the molecular machinery, the depth of the evolutionary history it represents, the cosmic age of the materials it is working with, that sophistication is to me one of the most extraordinary things about being alive. Now let me give you 3 things to do with all of this. 3 practices. Real, specific, grounded. That I think this knowledge, if you let it settle into you, actually enables. The first is what I call the photon pause. And I want to be clear that this is not meditation, not in the traditional sense, because traditional meditation usually asks the mind to quiet down or to focus on the breath. The photon pause asks the mind to be more active than usual, not less, to actually engage with what is physically happening in the moment of standing in sunlight. Here is how to do it. The next time you are in sunlight, walking outside, standing near a window, sitting on a porch, take 30 seconds, just 30 seconds, and deliberately attend to the physical reality of what is happening. Not the warmth in a vague way, not it's nice outside in a surface way, the actual physical event. Light that originated in a nuclear fusion reaction in the core of the sun. That spent perhaps 100,000 years fighting its way through the solar interior in a random walk of absorption and re-emission. That then traveled 93 million miles of empty space in 8 minutes and 20 seconds. That entered our atmosphere and was partially absorbed and scattered by air molecules. That survived to reach your skin, and that is now, at this moment, interacting with the atoms in your skin, being absorbed by molecules, converting its energy into heat, into photochemistry. Some of it is synthesizing vitamin D in your skin cells right now. Some of it is being absorbed by melanin and converted to heat. Your body is responding to it in real time with ancient and sophisticated molecular machinery that has been refined for 4 billion years. Feel that, not as a concept, as the actual physical event that is actually happening to you right now. You are in contact with a star. You are not looking at the star from a safe distance. You are receiving its radiation directly in your body, and your body is responding to it with billions of years of accumulated biological expertise. The universe is reaching you specifically and you are responding specifically, and this exchange, this conversation between stellar output and biological response, is happening right now, in this moment, in the atoms of your skin. I have found that attending to this reality, really attending to it, not as a thought experiment, but as a physical fact, changes the experience of being outdoors in a way that is hard to articulate but unmistakable. It is not religious, it is not mystical, it is what accurate attention to physical reality feels like. And accurate attention to physical reality, in my experience, is one of the most reliably profound experiences available to a human being. The second practice I want to give you is what I call the defense inventory. And this one is personal in a way that goes beyond physics, though it is grounded in the biology we've been discussing. Your body's approach to UV damage has 3 stages: accurate detection, appropriate repair, and, when repair is not possible, deliberate removal of the compromised element before it can cause larger harm. What I want you to do, and I mean this seriously, not as a thought experiment, but as an actual practice, is to apply that 3-stage framework to something in your own life that you know is damaged in some way. Something in a relationship, in a habit, in a belief about yourself, in a situation you are tolerating. Something that has a thymine dimer in it, so to speak. Something where the structure is distorting, where the ladder has a kink. Start with detection, not dramatization, not minimization. Detection. As specific and accurate as you can manage what exactly is wrong. Not everything is a mess. That's dramatization. Not nothing is really wrong, I'm fine. That's minimization. What specifically is the distortion? What is the kink in the ladder? Name it as precisely as you can. Then ask, what is the appropriate repair for this specific type of damage? Because, and this is the critical lesson from the biology, different types of damage require different types of repair. Nucleotide excision repair handles thymine dimers. Direct reversal handles different kinds of damage. Double-strand break repair handles yet another kind. Your body does not apply the same repair mechanism to every kind of damage, because the same mechanism does not work for all damage. And similarly, not all psychological or relational or situational damage requires the same response. Some damage requires conversation. Some requires time. Some requires professional help. Some requires a change in behavior. Some requires, and this is the hard one, the apoptosis protocol, the deliberate, clean, organized ending of something that is no longer repairable. The recognition that this particular cell, this particular situation, relationship, belief, behavior, has accumulated damage beyond what repair can address, and that the kindest and most protective thing you can do is let it go before it replicates in a way that causes larger harm. This is not a comfortable practice. The apoptosis protocol in cells and in life is never comfortable. But it is intelligent. It is protective. It is the body's wisdom about when to end something cleanly rather than letting the damage compound. And recognizing that this is sometimes the right response, that ending something is sometimes the most sophisticated and caring thing you can do, is one of the most practically useful things I know. The third practice is the conservation reminder. And this one I want you to apply specifically to loss, to endings, to the moments when something that mattered to you changes form and is no longer what it was. The first law of thermodynamics says that energy is conserved. The law of conservation of mass says that matter is conserved. Nothing is created from nothing, and nothing is destroyed into nothing. Things change form, they transform, but the underlying reality, the atoms, the energy persists. In the case of the atoms that peeled away from your sunburned skin, they are gone from your body, but they are not gone. They are somewhere. They are part of something else. The arrangement changed. The underlying matter persists. I want you to apply this to something you have lost, a relationship, a version of yourself, a phase of life, a person you loved. I am not telling you that the loss is not real. It is real. The arrangement has changed, and arrangements matter, and the specific configuration of you and this thing that was important to you is gone in a way that is genuinely irreversible, and that is genuinely grievable. I am asking you to also hold the conservation principle, the care you gave, the attention you brought, the ways you grew, the love you expressed, the time you invested, the things you learned. None of that is gone. It changed form. It is in you now, in your nervous system, in your memory, in the patterns of how you think and respond and move through the world. It is in the world, in the people who were touched by the thing. in the consequences it had, in the ripples it sent outward. The arrangement changed. The underlying reality is conserved. I have found this, genuinely not as a consolation, but as an accurate physical and philosophical insight, one of the most useful things to hold in a moment of loss, not to prevent the grief. Grief is appropriate. Grief is the pain of caring about specific arrangements, which is one of the most human things there is. But to grieve at the loss of the arrangement while knowing that the underlying reality persists, that nothing truly goes into nothing, is to grieve with a larger context. And a larger context, in my experience, does not make grief smaller. It makes it more bearable, because you know that what was real about the thing is still real, somewhere in some form in the ongoing transformation of matter and energy that is the universe doing what it always does. You are made of atoms that are 13.8 billion years old. You are made of elements forged in stars that lived and died before our sun existed. You carry molecular machinery that is 4 billion years old. You are engaged right now in a conversation with a nearby star that life began having 4 billion years ago. The specific arrangement that is you is temporary, as all arrangements are. But the materials are ancient, and they will continue long after your arrangement has transformed into something else. And there is something in that, something about the scale of it, about the deep history of it, about the ongoing continuity of it, that I find more comforting than almost anything. So let me bring this home. Let me tell you what I think we actually found today. Underneath the question of what happens to your atoms when the sun burns you, we followed a photon, a 100,000-year-old projectile of energy, born in a nuclear fusion reaction, fighting its way through the solar interior for longer than human beings have existed, crossing 93 million miles of space in 8 minutes, arriving at your skin. We watched it interact with DNA, with the most carefully preserved document in the history of life, and cause a thymine dimer, a specific and characterizable molecular distortion. We watched your body respond with an ancient, sophisticated, multi-layered defense system, damage detection, nucleotide excision repair, inflammation, apoptosis, immune surveillance. We understood the redness not as evidence of failure but as evidence of defense, the peeling not as breakdown but as protection, the tan not as health but as armor built in response to a detected threat. We understood UV-induced skin cancer not as an arbitrary cruelty but as the rare failure of multiple, redundant, extraordinarily effective defense systems, a failure worth understanding and preventing, but not worth fearing in the generalized, paralyzing way that fear without understanding usually produces. And then we zoomed out. We understood that this conversation between UV radiation and life has been ongoing for 4 billion years, that the molecular machinery in your cells is ancient beyond easy imagining, that the atoms in your skin were forged in dying stars before our solar system existed, that you are a temporary arrangement of ancient cosmic material, engaged in an ongoing exchange with the star you orbit, carrying within you the accumulated biological wisdom of 4 billion years of living things managing exactly this challenge. You are not fragile. You are ancient. You are a 4 billion year conversation between life and light, and the conversation is, on the whole, going remarkably well. You were not randomly assembled and thrown into a hostile universe to cope as best you can. You are the latest iteration of something that has been carefully, relentlessly, brilliantly optimized for exactly the conditions in which it finds itself. The conditions are challenging. They have always been challenging. But the thing that is meeting the challenge, that is you, has been preparing for these specific challenges for longer than the Earth has had continents. Here is what I want you to take away. Not a fact. You already have plenty of facts. A feeling. The feeling of standing in sunlight with accurate knowledge of what is physically happening, of being in contact with a star, of carrying 4 billion year old molecular machinery in every cell of your skin, of being made of atoms that have been through stellar explosions and interstellar clouds, and the history of life, of being in every moment that you are in sunlight, a participant in one of the oldest and most consequential conversations in the history of this planet. That feeling, when you really let it in, is not small. It is one of the largest feelings I know, and it is available to you anytime you step outside on a sunny afternoon and remember to attend to what is actually happening, not what it looks like, not what it feels like in the ordinary surface way, what it actually is. The universe is extraordinary, and you are not separate from it. You are a piece of it that has learned to wonder about itself, and that wondering, that curiosity, that willingness to ask what is actually happening at the level where the interesting physics lives, is the most distinctively human thing about you. It is what I have given my life to, and it has never disappointed me. If something in this conversation gave you something real, if the sunlight feels different now, if you'll think of something new the next time you feel that familiar sting of a burn or that warmth of a summer afternoon, then we've been in the right place together today. Hit like if this conversation was worth your time. Leave a comment with what surprised you most, whether it was the 100,000-year journey of the photon, or the ancient molecular machinery in your cells, or the cosmic origin of the atoms in your skin. I read them all, and the ones that catch me off guard are genuinely my favorites. And subscribe if you want more conversations that start with a question that seems simple on the surface and end somewhere you didn't expect to find yourself. Because that, as far as I can tell, is the only kind of conversation worth having. The kind that makes the world bigger on the way out than it was on the way in. See you in the next one.